The following program, Live and Learn, is made possible by Aging Partners. Find out more on their website at agingpartners@lincoln.ne.gov. Up ahead on this edition of Live and Learn, Kristen Stowe talks with Dr. Charles Erickson about his experiences in Zambia. Lita Paul Drake introduces the Hubert Humphrey III. Plus, Sam Truex speaks to Judge Sam Van Pelt about a book he co-wrote about the late J.J. Exon. And we finish up with some amazing China painting with Dolores Lintel and Peg Pelter. That's all straight ahead on this edition of Live and Learn.
Welcome to Live and Learn. I'm Kristen Stowe, and I am so pleased to have as my guest today Dr. Charles Erickson, whose retirement has taken him places he would have never imagined. Welcome, Dr. Erickson.
Thank you, Chris.
You retired in 2003 after 37 years of pediatric practice here in Lincoln. During that time, what did you think your retirement might look like?
Well, I knew I wanted to maintain my health, and I exercise, and I also wanted to do interesting things, travel, and I figured I needed to look for new adventures.
I think you have found those. So in addition to those activities, which I know you do, your retirement truly has taken on a world focus with medical missions to Zambia. What was the catalyst that took you to Zambia the very first time?
Well, First Plymouth Church, our church, has a Ghana connection, and I came out of church one day thinking, well, maybe that's something I ought to do. And it turns out that over a period of time, it evolved to going to Zambia rather than Ghana.
I see. So as we see a map of Africa with the country Zambia, could you please talk a little bit about the country itself?
Sure. Zambia is a country of about the size of Texas and about 12 million people. It is a sub-Saharan Africa country with a dry climate. They have one rainy season per year, and it's a very impoverished country. Mm-hmm. The half of the population lives in the rural areas, and are subsistent farmers who make a living, kind of scratching out a living with raising usually maize, but some other crops.
I see. How were you received there, and what did you do on that very first trip?
Well, I received a Yale scholarship to work at Livingston General Hospital for 6 weeks, and the idea is that we would work with the physicians there and trade off experience and information. Well, it turns out that for the most part, the physicians were more interested in, I think, having another body, and we really didn't have much interaction. It was hard to get them to come to the wards where I was working. But the people were grateful, and the mothers were grateful.
Mm-hmm. And I believe we have some pictures here to talk about?
Yes. This is little Richard, who is so sick that he couldn't brush the flies off his face, but he gradually recovered. This is after he got over his infection, and you can see he's really skinny. Mm-hmm. Now, he eventually recovered, and these are some mothers that were very grateful. This is taken the day I left, and they said they were very sorry to see me go, which made me feel real good.
Absolutely.
And then this is little Richard ready to go home, and you can see he's got a pot belly, and he's just now able to walk, because here he's an 18-month-old who's was unable to walk. He was so weak, and that, of course, that made him immune deficient. Now, so it was grateful, but I realized at that time that I could come over and treat a few kids, but really it was in prevention.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So you learned a lot while you were there, obviously, and you felt that prevention was really the key.
Yes.
Were you shocked at the conditions you found when you went that first time?
I had been somewhat prepared by the pediatrician that preceded me, so I knew things that there was kind of some on the health system was not very helpful. I had not seen the environment, and so that was a surprise in terms of where people lived, and the horrible diseases that I was seeing that were oftentimes untreatable because we didn't always have the medications and the equipment needed.
Mm-hmm. Did you think after that first trip you'd be going back again right away?
I really didn't, but the district officers of Rotary had heard that I had been over there, and they said, we need a district project. And so they enticed me into developing one, and along with other Rotarians at the Lincoln East Rotary Club, Ozzie Gilbertson and others, we began, and it became a district project, whereas we can seek matching grants from the Rotary Foundation. We have to raise funds, and then we'd get those funds matched.
Sure, sure. So it really became a partnership, and everything gelled for you to work together.
Yes.
That's wonderful. You began traveling back to Zambia then in earnest, I believe 7 more times.
Yes.
What is the focus of your trips now?
Well, I think we have a three-stage pyramid that we talk about, the Rotary Pyramid, in which clean water, agricultural projects, and nutritional education are a component. We are proposing a $150,000 grant at this time. We're working out the final details to conduct those various things. You can see from our photos that water's big. This is a source of water that they would use, and they would end up drinking it. You can see the cattle behind it. This is another site where they had tried to keep the animals out, but it wasn't very effective. And the animals there aren't toilet trained, so you have to, it's bad. If they have access to water, they're going to contaminate it.
And this picture, explain this. This is just amazing.
Well, this is after the watered sediment on the left of the screen, and that was the usual source. And after we did the drilling, that was the clean water that we got. So it's a blessing, because it'll bring health to these folks.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. So then the second stage of your pyramid is the gardens.
Well, it's agricultural projects.
Okay.
We started
All right.
with a garden, and the folks we work with over there are a Canadian group who have done the work that we collaborate with them. They've set up a cooperative to sell the produce from gardens, but they've also developed goat projects and egg projects now. You can see this is a good-looking Boer goat, B-O-E-R.
Wow.
And this is much better than the goats that they have. And they built a palace, they call it a palace, a house for the goats at night, so they're protected. And so there's Mr. Teddy at the Songway Village Garden. This man is a wonderful man. He was a schoolmaster, and now he's a farmer, and just a delightful person, tremendously energetic. So he's helping with that project. The Songway Village Garden that we see there was funded by my wife's family in honor of their parents who struggled in Nebraska early before irrigation, and we thought it was fitting to dedicate that to them.
And then the third component of the triangle is the education and nutritional help.
Because there's a lack of knowledge about what you should feed little babies. And it's a cultural issue we have to get through. It's traditionally the fathers eat first, then the mothers, then the older kids, and the babies are last. And it's tragic, because this first 2 to 3 years of life, it's so critical that we get adequate food in. So we were teaching the neighborhood health workers how to do examinations. We took blood counts, so we have a high percentage, a third of the kids are anemic. And then we proceeded to have cooking classes, because we felt it was better that they learn by doing than just simply giving them verbal instructions. And I like to call this cook it and they will eat it. Babies will eat about anything. This is something they weren't used to eating, but this is something that would be very nutritious. It had some traditional greens with the maize that they prepare for the babies. Corn does not provide adequate nutrition alone, and it's their source of so many of their calories.
Sure, sure. So your trips now include much more than providing medical
Yes.
assistance. It's more education and working with the agriculture.
It's prevention, and it's so desperately needed. They need a source of income, and that's where the produce can come
I
in.
see. Okay. Where do you stay when you go, and what are your living conditions
Well,
like on these trips?
we most recent years we've stayed in tents, we've stayed in homes, and sometimes out in the bush. We stay in primitive tents. These tents are really nice. They're very comfortable.
Okay.
It cools down at night, so you need to warm up. But sometimes when we're out in the bush, we get one-holers.
Oh no.
There you go. That's what you get to use for the bathroom.
Oh dear.
So, we don't have to do it all that way all the time.
That's right. So pretty primitive living there for you, and I'm sure you see some wildlife now and then.
Yes, oh yes, very
Yes.
definitely. But we go over to Botswana for a safari, although there's other places you can go closer to see some animals.
Have you ever felt afraid, or are you nervous when you're there?
Actually, no, it's a very safe country. I was told that to begin with. They've never had a civil war. The Tonga people that we work with are known as the peaceful people. However, I was a little nervous the day we were confronted by a hostile immigration officer because we didn't have the right credentials. She was accompanied by two soldiers armed with AK-47s. I was a little nervous. I didn't want to spend the rest of my life in a Zambian jail.
No.
But we
I
got
wouldn't
over it.
either.
We got through it, and it led
got
to
through
new opportunities.
Well, good. There's a positive end to that story then. What do you do while you're here in the States to prepare for these missions?
Well, we spend a lot of time raising funds, seeking Rotary projects. We work with Rotary, but we've also had a number of non-Rotarians who've contributed to our work. Some people are very busy, but they're successful, and they have contributed thousands of dollars. So we take money any place we can get it.
Wow. But
The other thing we spend a lot of time on is communicating with others. I was just up in Michigan this last weekend talking with an egg producer up there, a huge egg producer, and he's going to provide consultation for our egg projects. Eggs would be great for babies. It'd be just a wonderful thing for these babies, and they do eat eggs there.
Yes.
It's part of their culture. So then grant writing, we're working on this grant, we have to work with the Rotary Club in Livingston, Zambia. So we keep busy. Then once a month, we have a phone call with the neighborhood health workers. If we had a better internet connection, we could do FaceTime or Skype, and that would be a wonderful way they could present patients to us. So that's something we'd like to see more of in the future.
Right. So there are future issues that you need to address in Zambia, and the internet system would be one. Are there others?
Yes, I think solar power has a big possibility for providing electricity in the rural areas where they don't have electricity, and most of these areas don't have electricity. Songway Village, which is near Livingston, just got it, but solar could be big. Again, you will see, it's interesting, you see solar panels on mud huts. They don't have a stove, they don't have a refrigerator, but they got a boom box that's powered by a solar panel.
How interesting.
Yeah.
How interesting.
And then I think there's really a need for better training of the folks in the rural areas, the neighborhood health workers who really don't have a lot of training.
Sure.
I think I was told by a Dutch consultant that there is money in the health system, but lacks expertise out in the rural areas. So that's
see.
a really important issue.
Yes, yes. Do you see major differences between Zambian children and those you see here in the United States?
I think the difference is the kids don't have toys that are produced unless we bring them. So you can see maybe in this picture that they had a little toy that they're homemade toys. So you will see homemade toys, you will see things made out of copper wire, but then they just play with what's available. There's something to be said for that. That our kids have, sometimes our little ones end up playing with the box that it came in, so
Sure,
it's
sure.
not all bad.
But they're generally very happy children.
Yes, I would say these people are happy people. Unfortunately, they may not always plan ahead, the mothers and the people.
So I'm guessing the mothers don't worry maybe about quite the same things that mothers here do.
Well, we'd see kids come in with colds and to the clinics that we've involved in, and so, and I think they are concerned about their children, how they're growing. One mother told us, she said, well, we know we need to feed our children better, but we don't have the wherewithal to do it. And so, but still it's a cultural issue trying to help them understand. We had one of the Rotarians in Livingston tell us recently, he said, Zambians think you get sick from what you eat and not what you don't eat. And so that's a cultural perception we're going to have to get over.
I see. Interesting. So you are going again in July.
Yes.
How much longer do you think you might participate in this program?
Well, as long as I can tolerate the 30 to 35 hour plane trip. That's probably the most stressful thing in my life right now. It's a tough trip. But if I'm healthy and there's a need, I'd like to go back, but we'll just have to see.
And you've touched upon something that I think we should talk about just a minute. It's important to maintain a healthy lifestyle so you can take part in these projects that mean so much to you. But as you said, this is a very arduous trip, and you need to be in very good physical shape to take it on.
Yep. And I exercise regularly, and I try to eat right, and try to avoid as much stress as possible. So, but that's critical.
Yes, I can imagine. Even with all of this, you are still busy with local commitments.
Yes.
I know you volunteer at the People's Health Center.
Yes, I do. I'm becoming more involved with that the group because what's interesting, you see, we have many folks there from many different countries, and I just love that. I just love the different cultural perspectives that come in, and so that's very enjoyable for me.
Do you think you'll be able to take any tourist attractions in at any point when you're over there, or is it all work?
Oh no, it's absolutely. It's all work and no play is not good.
That's right.
We're going to Cape Town this year after our tour, and that's an interesting place. The vineyards, wineries there are great, and they've been producing wine for 400 years there. So it's good.
Well, good. I'm glad to hear that. Dr. Erickson, thank you so much for being with us today. We thank you also for continuing to use your expertise to truly make a difference in the world.
Thanks so much.
You are welcome. Live and Learn will continue after these messages.
What does Medicare cover? How can I afford to keep living in my home? When I need help with house and yard work, who can I turn to? Why am I so tired? Am I eating right? Should I exercise? Where can I go for answers to my questions about aging?
Aging Partners is the place to call when you have questions on aging. Our experts are here to help you with unbiased answers for you or your loved ones. Aging Partners, we're only a phone call away.
Delighted to welcome to Live and Learn Hubert Horatio Humphrey III, son of Hubert Horatio Humphrey II.
That's right.
Who was Vice President of our United States under Lyndon Johnson. Welcome to Lincoln, Nebraska, HHH.
Thank you. It's a delight to be here. This is a great city, a great state, and to be able to be here and to visit with organizations, like Aging Partners, and all to deal with some of the great friends that are here. It's absolutely wonderful. So I'm delighted to be here.
Was your grandpa.
That's right.
But what an honorable name. Tell me about that name. I love the name. And we call him Skip.
Well, the name Hubert Horatio Humphrey comes from, and I just learned this in the last several months, a soldier that was in the Union Army in the Civil War was the first Hubert Horatio Humphrey. But my grandfather took the name, or was given that name, and then he passed it on to his son, and my father passed it on to me, and I passed it on to my son. So there are actually 5 of us.
5. So we have Hubert Horatio Humphrey the fourth.
Yes.
And what age is he now?
He's about 43.
Well, I love the name. It's going down in history, and so are you. And I love the fact that this gentleman is still working. Now, you're working with the Older Americans group.
Yes.
So what brings you to Nebraska?
Well, it's part of the new agency in Washington, D.C., the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. This was an agency that was created out of the legislation that resulted from our most recent economic problems in 2008, 2010, the economic crisis, the housing crisis. There was legislation that Congress passed, and part of that was to establish a new agency that had a principal focus of looking at what are the concerns of consumers in the financial marketplace. And part of that was to establish some offices within the Bureau for special populations, so one of them being students, and we've heard a lot about student loans and the debt related to that. Another was service members, military service members, and we've heard quite a bit about some of the concerns that obviously service member families have. And the third was older Americans. And so the Office of Older Americans, the Office of Financial Protection for Older Americans was established. And I was asked to participate in the establishment of the office. And it's been an exciting opportunity.
So glad that you are still working. A lot of older Americans are continuing to work for several reasons.
Well, you know, it's not only the joy of the work
and
the challenge of keeping up with young, talented, exciting individuals, but from my perspective, it's both a psychological positive, an emotional positive, and frankly, a physical positive. Keeping your mind busy, keeping that muscle between the ears active is very important for seniors. Just as we take care of our physical bodies and by decent exercise and the rest, we need to exercise our energy and our intellect and stay as sharp as we can. And so this has been personally for me a very exciting opportunity. And to serve in public life again. I've had a career that's allowed me to do a lot of different things, and most of it has been in public life. Has been personally very rewarding.
So you were a state senator for many, many years for Minnesota.
Well, for about a decade, 10 years.
10 years, and Attorney General.
Yes, I was Attorney General in Minnesota for 16 years.
And then you ran for governor.
Well, I ran for governor, yes.
Yes, well, but the fun, and we have to mention the fact that who won that race? Was Mondale was in that race too, wasn't he?
Ted Mondale was, yes.
Yeah, Ted Mondale.
And the current governor was in that race.
And the current governor, Jesse Ventura, was the one who, explain that to me. How did a wrestler beat out you established candidate?
Well, it's a good question. I'm not so sure. I suspect that the public and the voters got a little tired of a year-long battle in primaries, and a new fellow showed up. He had a bit of dynamism, and he does. Jesse is an interesting and a very talented character. And we had a three-way race. So in a sense, not any one of us got a majority, but he got more of the votes than the other two. And actually, in my view, it was probably one of the better things that happened to me because not only was I able to take care of some physical things that I wasn't fully aware of at the time, but it gave me an opportunity to go back and do something that I was very interested in doing, and that was teaching. I was invited to teach at Harvard, and I had an opportunity to teach there.
In what area?
It was, this was with the Kennedy School of Public Policy, and I was a fellow there for a semester. And then I came back and did some work in the communications management field, which I had never done. I had practiced law before, and so, one thing leads to another. The next thing you know, I'm get engaged with an organization known as AARP, and from there I was invited to get back into this business of public life. And in between there, I was teaching at the School of Public Health at the University of Minnesota in their division of epidemiology. And so it's been a varied, wonderful career, been absolutely exciting. It's like I've been on this journey of learning new things all the time. And I hope that your listeners and viewers keep thinking about that there's a lot of new things out there to learn about.
Oh, we're aware of the newness. And we always want it the way it used to be. Well, we didn't used to do that when we did it our way, and I don't like that, and I don't need this all. And the new technology is changing so rapidly. It is so difficult to keep up with this. So what are our seniors supposed to do?
Well, that in the field of the financial decision making, and that's really what the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau is all about. Obviously, what has happened is the market has literally exploded with products and services and the complexity of the marketplace. And then the means of accessing that marketplace in some ways is much more convenient. Now you can do most of your banking right on a smartphone, but it's also sometimes challenging, particularly for seniors that are not used to that kind of technology. So how to help people our age still maintain balancing checks, going to the bank, and at the same time having them learn about the new technology and accessing some of the important things that can be done through the digital age it's a challenge, but it's a wonderful challenge.
And what do we do for those people who say, I don't need that, I don't need that, and are refusing to get on the computer and refusing
Sure.
to keep up? What?
Well, that's one of the things that I think the Office of Older Americans is all about, is to make sure that the financial systems not only take care of those who are on the front end of this change and the younger generations,
Yeah.
but to also make sure that they're keeping up with those of us who are a little more comfortable writing out a check, balancing our checkbooks by hand, and doing those kinds of things. So we need to be able to reach that full spectrum. The other thing that we're deeply concerned about is, really the Office of Older American has a mission of basically 2 points, and that's number one, to help people make wise and good decisions, financial decisions as they age, so that they make sound decisions for themselves. Mm-hmm. And secondly, to make sure that they are protected from those who would scam and rip off the money that has been hard-earned through through seniors' entire lives. Literally, when you think about it, you have your home, you maybe have a car, you've got some other things that you've accumulated, and the resources of your retirement planning, if you have any at all. And so your life is literally at stake. And sometimes these scam artists, they're pretty good. They can take that money away pretty quickly. And if it's gone, it may be gone permanently. And you don't have time to recover it because you're an older person.
And sometimes family members will abscond with the money. I'll take care of that, Mom and Dad. Don't you worry about a thing.
Well, I think there's the positive side that the informal caregivers, by and large, for families are other family members, younger generations. So it's important that the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, we call it the CFPB, it's important that the CFPB have an education program that informs younger people not only about their financial concerns and how best to manage that, but how also to help mom and dad down the road, and as well as to help mom and dad understand that. So by and large, most people handle that well, but there is a very significant number of individuals in the family that, given the authority, will sometimes divert the money to their interests rather than the adults' interests. And that we need to put a stop to. That financial exploitation of seniors needs to stop. Now, it's done sometimes externally by con artists and scammers, but quite often it's done by someone right in the family that you really care and love. And that's really unfortunate.
Yes, and with our diminished ability mentally, we may not be making the proper
well, and that's the other thing. Think about this. When Social Security first came in under Franklin Roosevelt.
Yeah, good old Frank.
Yeah, I mean, the average age of an individual that would live beyond the time they got their first Social Security check was between 3 and 5 years, and that's it, and they were gone. Now, you get your check at age 65 if you decide to take, or 66 now, I think it's close to 67 for full amount of check, and you're going to live another 25 years. So the issue is, how do we help people, and how do we provide the resources and the tools to allow people to age in and live independently throughout those years and to manage the resources that they have? Part of that challenge is, like anything else, sometimes things slip a little. And I can be honest with you, I'm not quite the same sharp guy that I was when I was 35. I still think I'm pretty sharp, but the reality is that even without a particular problem, diagnosed problem of Alzheimer's or others, by and large, most people age, as they age, they lose a bit of their decision-making capacity. And one of the first ways in which they lose it is dealing with complex financial transactions. So we need to make sure that the caregivers, whether they are outside professionals or whether they're just a family member, understand how they can help along the way, and that's really important.
Well, how do we turn to a financial advisor, for example? I mean, somebody says, "Oh, Joe does he's really really does a great job," and so we have a tendency to respond to friends' suggestions.
And Joe, if you look at Joe's name and his professional name, it'll probably have some alphabet soup on the back side of it. Yeah. But it's very confusing. People say, well, I don't know what that is. And if I go and look it up on the internet or in the dictionary or encyclopedia or something, you get very confused. Well, Congress realized that, and they asked our office to report back to them and give them recommendations to clear this up so that people who are older can make wise decisions about who their financial advisor is. What is their background education? What is the code of conduct that they are expected to adhere to? How is that enforced? What is the experience that they've had? And can we compare one advisor to another advisor's experience? That's what we have now issued a recommendation to Congress and to the SEC, the Securities Exchange Commission, about how best to handle that. And because states like Nebraska and like Minnesota and others have securities commissioners, they handle a lot of the other, and insurance commissioners, they handle a lot of the financial products as well. So we've provided some recommendations to the states as well. So we're trying to clean this out and clear it up, and once again, to give a tool and to give some help and aid to seniors to make wise decisions and sound decisions.
Now, we can go on the web, and folks, this is another reason why we have to keep up with the technology, because we got to go on the web. But I love Google. I mean,
there you go. Well, if you can get to Google, you can get to our website.
It gives me all the answers. Otherwise, I would have to go to the library, look it up, and so forth. So you have a website for some of the issues we've just touched. Oh, just touch
a little
the surface,
bit, right?
Of all of the things that are facing all of us. And that web address is?
I'd ask your viewers to please go and take a look at Consumer Finance. It's all one word, no spaces, consumerfinance.gov, G-O-V. Consumerfinance.gov. And in there you'll find a whole lot of interesting information, one of which is a web page, part of another web page that you drop down on older Americans. And you'll find the report that we gave to Congress. Okay. You'll find information about reverse mortgages. You have another place to go besides a 30-second commercial from a retired Hollywood actor. Okay.
Yes, and so come to our meeting. We'll buy you a free lunch.
Well, come to it. Yep, exactly.
There is no such thing as a free lunch.
Well, the point being that some of these products are appropriate in the right circumstances, but otherwise they may be inappropriate and they may be very expensive as opposed to other alternatives. So take a look at this. The other thing that I would ask your viewers is help us. This is an interactive thing, so you can ask a question to the on the internet. You can write in your question. We'll get back to you, and in that way we learn what your interest is, and you can help us give better answers to the specific. Because when you ask that question, when your viewer asks that question, how many others would like to ask that question? Thousands of others. So that's important.
The Office of Older Americans, I'm glad you are there. Hubert Horatio Humphrey III. I met your father when I was 18 years of age, and now I get to meet his son when I'm not telling you.
Oh, we're young at heart.
Well, we're young at heart. Oh, my heart's, I'm having a heart attack. What a delight to meet you. Thank you so much. Welcome to Nebraska.
Thank you for your good work.
And
I appreciate it.
Take care of those Minnesota Vikings up there.
Oh, we will. We're going to work hard at it, and but we keep watching that little football team called Nebraska. They are tough characters.
We're not a little football team. This is Husker Power.
I know you
Husker
are.
Power. We'll take you guys on.
All right.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. And Live and Learn will be back right after this word.
What does Medicare cover? How can I afford to keep living in my home? When I need help with house and yard work, who can I turn to? Why am I so tired? Am I eating right? Should I exercise? Where can I go for answers to my questions about aging?
Aging Partners is the place to call when you have questions on aging. Our experts are here to help you with unbiased answers for you or your loved ones. Aging Partners, we're only a phone call away.
Welcome back to Live and Learn. I'm Sam Truax, and today our guest has been involved in an important segment of Nebraska history and in the development of a book to describe that history. Our guest is Judge Sam Van Pelt, and the book is Big Jim Exon, A Political Biography. Judge Van Pelt, why did you get involved in authoring this book? And by that I mean, why did you think this story needed to be told?
Well, I got into this because Chuck Pallison asked me to get into it, but he had no trouble convincing me that this story needed to be told. Jim Exon won more statewide elections than any other figure in Nebraska history. He won 2 governor elections statewide and 3 United States Senate elections. He never got beat, and this is even more unusual because he was a Democrat, and this is always a heavily Republican state. But it was at an interesting time in the state's history when times were basically pretty good, and I think it's a story that needed to be told. And also from a personal standpoint, Jim Exon did a lot for me. And this was my chance to thank him for what he did for me, quite frankly.
Yeah, I'm familiar with his involvement in promoting the Niobrara River as a wild and scenic river, and also his name is on the training center at Camp Ashland because of his involvement in funding that and making sure that that was an improvement that happened in Nebraska. These are pretty diverse accomplishments and influential accomplishments for a guy who started his career as a businessman in Lincoln.
That's a good observation, and they really tie in with 2 of his interests. Really, I'd say more as a senator, but the Guard, he was always interested in the Guard, and he was always very supportive of the National Guard when he was a governor. But then, after he got back to Washington, he was on the Armed Services Committee. And he was a strong member of the Armed Services Committee, and he used that position to support not just the Nebraska National Guard, but the National Guard throughout the United States. He was a real friend of the National Guard, and it was very appropriate that they named what used to be the Guard Camp at Ashland after him, and so that was an important thing. The business with the Niobrara River, Jim Exon, people think of him as being a conservative, and he was a conservative, but he was also an outdoorsman, and he was a conservationist. And a lot of the things that he did, especially after he got back to Washington, were to support the outdoors and the scenic designation of the Niobrara River, which was opposed by some people up in that area, and including the current United States Senator from Nebraska. But he opposed the Norden Dam, which would have really ruined the river from the standpoint of canoeing and outdoor recreation. And the other thing that he fought hard and defeated was the Two Forks Dam out on the Platte River in Colorado, which affected the flow of water into the state of Nebraska. So 2 of his greater efforts were really for conservation and outdoors and
environmental purposes there, yeah. He's environmental. Well, Chuck Pallison co-authored this book with you. Can you relate to our viewers what your relationship with Chuck Pallison?
I can. Chuck Pallison I've known I knew him a little in law school. He was a couple years behind me. But then I was an associate at Klein Williams, and Chuck came out of the service and went to work at Klein Williams. So he and I worked in the same law firm for a while, and then I left and did some other things. But after I left the bench, and I was this came up after that, but when I was practicing law on my own, Pallison had a conflict of interest in a case, and he turned it over to me, and I got a fairly good fee. It was maybe $200 or $300, but it was a good fee at that time. Exon was running against Nobby Tiemann, And I kind of was staying out of that race. Even though I was a Democrat, I had a lot of friends who were Tiemann supporters. One of the major fundraisers they had, and Pallison came to me and asked me for a $35 contribution, and I hemmed and hawed, and Pallison was a great fundraiser. He said, well, don't you remember that case that I sent to you and you got a $200 fee? He said, you can afford to give $35 to Exxon. And he was absolutely right, and I gave him the money. But you know, because of that, when they started looking, after he got elected, and they started looking for an insurance director, Exxon remembered that I'd been at that early fundraiser. And so he appointed me as the insurance director, and then from there I went on to be a district judge. So, you know, this is a lesson in political contributions. I parlayed that $35 Exxon contribution to a lifetime career, but it's partly because of all that I did that later on Chuck came to me and asked me if I'd like to help him author a book on Jim Exxon, and I said, well, you know, I did a book of my own, and it costs money. Most people don't. Most publishing companies don't want to go for a small book like this. And he said, no. He says, we have funds available for this. And it turned out that he was the treasurer of the Exxon committee, and they did have some money left over, which under the campaign rules you can use to do a history, a biography of the candidate. That's one of the, you can't spend it on personal things, but you can do it for that. So this book was financed by the Exxon re-elected the Senate campaign committee.
Yep.
And then it was just a labor of love after that, because the thing that we did, we interviewed over 100 people. And in my first book, it was consisted primarily of interviews, and I enjoy interviewing people. I've had people tell me that maybe I should have been a journalist rather than a lawyer. I don't know if that's because of my legal abilities, but in any event, that's how I got into it. I got into it to help Chuck Pallison. This is Chuck Pallison's book. It really is. I'm just kind of a tag along.
Well, you're the one who ended up having to complete it because of Chuck Pallison's demise, but Chuck was always the campaign manager for Governor Morrison, and that morphed over into being the campaign manager for Senator
Actually,
Exxon.
Exxon was the campaign manager for Morrison, but Chuck worked on his careers, or on his campaign.
I see.
And he was either the campaign manager or the finance chairman, I think, for almost all of Exxon's campaigns. He was deeply involved in all of Exxon's campaigns.
Yep, he said that was his golf. Like some people play golf, and he does that for his hobby.
And he was very, very good at it. He was a good organizer, and he was a good money raiser, and he was just a good guy. But he was always in the background. You never really saw him up front, and he never really took much credit for it.
Well, again, he gets his name on this book, so at least he gets a little credit here, huh?
And I'm happy to say that even though he passed away before it came out, he saw the cover. Peggy Zier is a relative of his. She designed the cover. But one of the best things that we had just delivered the final transcript of the book to the publisher about 10 days before Chuck died. And I felt really good that he saw the book, the content, and signed off on it before he passed away.
That's great. It was an important project to him. Well, again, regarding getting the book published, we've had a lot of, we had from time to time authors on the Live and Learn show who talked about getting their books published and written, and so you have some experience there. Can you tell us about your experience of putting this together? Again,
well, I could talk for the rest of the show on that, and I won't, but I'm going to give some people advice. If you're thinking about writing a book or talking about writing a book, start on it. Do it this afternoon. Do it this morning. Start on it immediately, because I know more people who say, I'm writing a book on this, I'm writing a book on that, and they never get it done. And it takes a long time. My first book, I did the interviews for over 25 years. This book took 3 years for the interviews and another year with the publisher. So it takes a long time. Get started on it.
Well, with your busy schedule, again, your involvement with Exxon's career has kept you busy even up to the current time. And with your busy schedule, I don't anticipate that you actually put the words on the paper too much, or you or Chuck, either one.
Well, actually we did. We had an editor, and I wanted to put her name on the cover. Chuck didn't think we needed to do that, but her name was Jean Smith. She lives out in Curtis, Nebraska, and she is a Western history writer of some success. She's written 2 good books about Medicine Creek and the early pioneer days. And she took what we did, and I'm not going to say she rewrote it, but she reorganized it, and she wrote it in such a way that I think this book reads like it was written by one person. It doesn't read like 2 people wrote it, or like Donald Duck's nephews when they talk, you know, and there'd be a sentence from each one of them. I think she really brought it all together. So Jean Smith deserves a lot of credit for this book.
Actually, it looks pretty thick when you look at it, but I understand it's pretty easy reading for
Well,
people who want.
you're very kind. If it has a fault, and this comes from me, it has a lot of stories. I love old stories. I love to tell old stories. And we quote a lot of people in here. We tell a lot of Frank Morrison stories, and they're always good stories, and Dick Shagrew and Frank Barrett, and we really, out of the over 100 people that we interviewed, we have a lot of good anecdotes that I think are really good.
That's what I mean about the fact that that was an important segment of history. A lot of those people were very involved in Nebraska history.
Well, they really were, and I feel good about that. One thing I want to do, I want to give Chuck Pallison credit for being a door opener. You'll note in here on the cover and in the book, we have direct quotes from President Clinton, from Jimmy Carter. They would never have talked to me. Chuck Pallison wrote to those 2 former presidents, and they said, sure, we'd be happy to help you. Prepare 5 questions, and we'll answer the 5 questions. Each of them did the same thing, and this must be common among people like that who are in demand. But our interview, our material from Clinton is very good. It's printed verbatim. Our material from Jimmy Carter is printed verbatim. Pallison also got an interview from Chuck Hagel, which at the time we didn't realize was as significant as it probably turned out to be. Yeah. I would ask him a lot of different questions about the Defense Department and Israel and things like that if I'd known that he was going to be Secretary of Defense. But Hagel gave us a good interview. Nobby Tiemann gave us a wonderful interview, largely due to Jim Hewitt, who was a friend of mine and a friend of Nobby's. Kayor gave us a good interview. Our current governor, Governor Heinemann, gave us an interview. Mike Johans. We have Ben Nelson. Of course, Ben Nelson, he was an employee. He worked for Exxon. But because of Chuck Pallison, he got us some really good interviews with some important people who would not have given me the time of day.
Well, we've only got a couple minutes here, but what do you feel is the most important accomplishments of Senator Exxon or Governor Exxon, either one?
I think both things. I think it was the people that he brought into government. In fact, somebody asked him after his 8 years as governor what his greatest accomplishment was, and rather than citing any legislation or any programs like the office buildings and all those things, he said it was the people that I brought into government. And Ben Nelson's a good example. And I went through and I wrote down some of the names, and I just give you an example of some of the people that were involved. Norm Otto, who was a wonderful man. I've already mentioned Ben Nelson, Dorothy Obink, and Fran White, Stan Maskey, who everybody knows, Bill Peters, Norman Kravosha, W. Don Nelson, Jim Fagan, John Jacobson, John Oberg, Tom Doyle, Gary Chunka, Don Leuenberger, Bill Hopner, Lauren Belker, I mean, Mark Bowen. I could go on and on and on and on. These are all people that Jim Exxon brought into government.
Yeah, we''ve had W. Don Nelson on the Live and Learn show.
Well, he's an interesting man.
Yeah, for his own interview.
And we didn't have any scandals. Exxon didn't have any scandals. I mean, you know, he wasn't off hiking on the Appalachian Trail when he really was with his girlfriend. None of those things ever happened under the Exxon administration.
Nebraskans are pretty square, I guess.
Well, they are. But people in Nebraska want honesty in their public officials. They really do. They want people who work hard and are honest. And that was what Jim Exxon was.
Many Nebraskans are familiar with Jim Exxon's positions, but it'd be interesting for them to read some of the details behind that. I would like to thank today's guest, Judge Sam Van Pelt.
Sam, thank you for having me.
Live and Learn will be back shortly.
What does Medicare cover? How can I afford to keep living in my home? When I need help with house and yard work, who can I turn to? Why am I so tired? Am I eating right? Should I exercise? Where can I go for answers to my questions about aging?
Aging Partners is the place to call when you have questions on aging. Our experts are here to help you with unbiased answers for you or your loved ones. Aging Partners, we're only a phone call away.
I'm Dolores Lentell, one of the hosts, and I have a delightful guest today. It's Peg Pelter, who is the proprietor of Pelter House, and she does china painting, beautiful china painting, and she will be producing a piece as we visit today. So if we could just start, Peg, if you could tell me a brief history of china painting.
Well, china painting started probably as soon as Europeans started making porcelain, which would have been about 1725. Didn't really become kind of a hobby, though, until about the 1830s or 40s.
Okay.
And that was because Queen Victoria and her daughter Charlotte wanted to learn how to china paint. And so then, of course, all of the upper middle class ladies wanted to learn to paint like the Queen and the Princess. And so china painting became all the rage in England, and then, of course, traveled across the ocean and probably started getting popular here in the United States in the 1850s, 1860s.
Okay, so it's began in Europe,
Right.
not in China.
Well, porcelain was first made in China.
But the art of painting the porcelain.
But
really-
yeah, well,
okay.
especially as a hobby.
Okay.
You know, I mean, obviously they painted porcelain in China as well, but as a hobby sort of activity, yeah, it's really, I think, only been in Europe, or the style at any rate in which
Okay.
we paint.
So when it came to the United States, then was about the time of the Civil War. And what did that have any impact on what became of the art?
Yeah, during the Civil War, of course, a lot of women, there wasn't any opportunity for them to marry because, of course, so many people were killed during the war. And so as, you know, part of the Cooper Union and all of that, a lot of women started china painting and actually used china painting as a way to support themselves.
Okay, so it was a cottage industry back during the
Yeah, it was a
after the
cottage
Civil
industry.
War.
Yeah.
Okay.
And also a lot of upper middle class women painted for their dowries. You know, you embroidered your linens, you crocheted your doilies, and you painted your china.
Okay.
And so it was, you know, like I say, a middle class or an upper middle class thing to do.
And so some of the collector pieces that you see now as heirlooms were probably produced during that period
Yeah.
and passed on down through the family to become a valuable piece now as a family treasure.
Yeah, it's amazing how much leg some of these pieces have. You know that they're around for 200 or 300 years.
So they become collector's pieces, and now it's becoming popular to paint china again. Would that be a reasonable thing to say?
Well, you know, china painting has never been as popular as, say, like knitting or quilting or any of that. It's always been a fairly small group of people that china painted. And so, as you, no, I guess I don't see china painting as becoming wildly popular.
Okay.
It was more popular back in the late 60s, early 70s, and has been on a slow decline kind of
see.
ever since.
Okay. So how did you become interested? When did you first see it, and how did you get started doing this?
Well, I was wandering around the mall, and there was a woman painting, just like I'm painting right now, and she had a bunch of her already fired pieces there. And so I picked up her card and called her and ended up taking classes from her. And then somewhere in there got obsessed, you know, just found myself painting more and more all of the time.
Okay.
And have been at it ever since. That was, would have been about 1976 or 78, somewhere
So you've
in
been at
there.
it about 30,
So I've been at it for
about
30
years. And then you do this as a hobby, but I saw your portfolio, when I visited with you the other day, and you do restoration work and contract for people who are remodeling their kitchens and that sort of thing as well, don't you?
Yeah, basically I can paint on anything that has a glaze. The paints I use are called overglaze paints, and they're designed to be fired in a kiln. So whenever you need a permanent painting on a glazed surface, I'm your person.
Okay. And you brought some of your lovely pieces today. Would you like to explain some of those? The large framed piece here is just beautiful.
Well, thanks. Yeah, the framed piece is painted on a porcelain tile. I suppose, yeah, it's a porcelain tile. The other pieces are probably, the porcelain originates from Japan, and some of them are, the grape pitcher is of course a German design, which was actually kind of borrowed from silverware designs. So when you look at a lot of porcelain, you can also see the shape of silverware and stuff. So anyway,
And a lot of the Revere ware has
Yeah.
that same.
has that same look. Yeah.
Okay. And the large vase is just absolutely lovely with the wisteria on it.
Thank you.
Is that done in any unique fashion or pattern or anything that makes it so different?
That particular style was a style that was popular from about 1880 to about 1910. It's called the naturalistic style.
Okay.
And then it kind of faded as a style, and Art Deco and Art Nouveau became the style, and they called it conventional painting.
Okay.
And then I would say in the 40s and in the 50s, then they kind of went back to this naturalistic style. So it's kind of recirculated, I guess.
Okay, all right. Now the plate is black and white. That struck me as being very unusual.
It is for China painting. You know, I like to do a little portraiture, and so did this. It's a copy of a photograph of Mark Twain, and well, anyway, I think it's an effective photo. It was an effective photograph, so it made a nice study.
Right. Okay. And how is our plate coming?
Oh, pretty good here. What I'm doing now is I'm marking out the petals, and then with some turpentine, I'll actually start removing some paint so that we can see the flowers. As you can see, I've put some brown and some green around the flowers to help frame them up. And now we'll start actually creating some petals. But mostly what I'm doing here is removing paint.
So now you're doing the detail work that
Yeah.
would identify the petals and the portions of the flower.
Yeah.
Okay. Now you teach classes as well.
Yeah, I teach at Irving Recreational Center.
Okay, so anyone who wants additional information can give you a call.
Yeah.
Yeah. And you've been doing this for such a long time, you must have a lot of women in Lincoln who do this.
I figure I've started over 100 or 200 women China painting.
Wow.
You know, not everybody sticks with it.
Sure.
You know, you go on to different activities and different things, but yeah, I think I've started probably over about 200 students.
Now, why porcelain and not some other more porous kind of glassware?
Porcelain is the smoothest. And so when you're porcelain painting or China painting, you're basically painting on glass.
Okay.
And so you can get a smooth, even color. And so that's what makes it fun. China paints are, I always think of as kind of the watercolors of the ceramics world. And so they're prettiest when you see a bleed of color, like on the wisteria vase, you can see like some blue peeking through the purple.
Well, and on this vase where it kind of spreads down the side of the picture, I mean, where it spreads down the side, it's
Yeah, you see that
between the-
transparency of the color.
Yeah.
And so again, so since China paints are kind of transparent, you need a white, or it works most effectively on a white background, so you can see that bleed of it through. And then also it's just beautifully smooth.
Yeah, the hard finish probably, where if it was more porous like pottery, would the paints be absorbed into the pottery?
They wouldn't necessarily be absorbed, but because there's texture on a pottery piece, they you wouldn't get the same effect. You would get more of a a textured effect, I guess.
So it's the hard surface and the plain white that makes it more attractive. Oh, look at that! That's really pretty.
Yeah, we've got our first rose done, and I'll start on my second here. But anyway, as you can see, I'm just kind of pulling the color in towards, but what I'm really doing is removing paint.
Okay, you're bringing out the definition of the...
Yeah.
And what do you do after you have finished a piece? Tell me about the finishing process.
When things are, after I'm done painting, then what I do is I put it in a kiln. I fire it to about 1500 degrees. Usually takes about 4 hours to reach that temperature, and then it takes about another 3 or 4 hours for it to cool. And then once that's done, I might come back and add some more detail work to a flower, or add, like come back in here and add some more color.
Okay.
So I might come back and add more. And
does it have to be refired then?
And then it would have to be refired.
The second time.
So like the wisteria piece probably has 3 or 4 fires on it.
Oh, okay. And what does the firing accomplish? It makes it so it won't wash off, or
yeah, it makes it a permanent surface. Technically what happens is the glaze softens and the pigments fall through into the glaze, and then as the glaze cools, the pigment is trapped inside the glaze, kind of like bananas in Jell-O.
Sure. Okay.
It's kind of caught in that little layer of glaze.
Okay.
So as long as the glaze is on the piece, the paint won't come off.
Okay, it becomes a permanent
part of it.
Okay. Okay, well we're about out of time, and I think we've got a picture ready to go here.
Yeah.
So. Okay, a final shot. Oh, look at that. All done within 15 minutes. Well, I thank you very much, Peg. This has been absolutely delightful to learn how you do this and the history of it, and
well, thanks.
And all that you've accomplished. It's
yeah, no, it's kind of fun. There's not many of us China painters around anymore.
Yeah,
so
an enjoyable hobby and a way to express yourself.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
And we'll be right back after this.